and benefit increase that's in the budget for next year, which is $509 per pupil. Our grant revenue dollars are down, and that equates to about $494 per pupil. 1.3 million was the total grant reduction from last year to this year, and now we're projecting another 1.3 million less from this year to next year. So these are grants that are either just going away or being reduced. The bottom line there, the textbooks and capital items. We had a lot of textbook curriculum purchases this year, a lot of capital items this year in the general fund budget. So those are coming out next year, so that's a favorable 390 per pupil change. So these four budget items, is about a negative 220 per pupil, or about 581,000 included in the budget for next year.
And you're using the zero change in pupil count for those multipliers?
Yes. So here's changes into next year over this year that projected per pupil 392 increase, projecting a flat enrollment. So we're using the same count as this year, which will hopefully remain steady next year. Over several years, past years, that we've had declines. So that might be a bit aggressive, but that's what's projected in this budget. Our general fund local revenue includes approximately 5 from the township's non-homestead properties and commercial personal property, and that's up $440,000 from this year. Our federal title grant revenue and other state and federal grants are projected to be down almost 1.3 million on this year. That whole 1.3 million does not have a direct bottom line impact, because some of those grant funds are usually for one-time purchases. So in that number is, for example, the Zero Eyes, like gun detection software. We got the grant, we spent the money. That's really a one-time purchase. So that would be included in that 1.3 million. So it's not really a bottom line impact in total. On the expenditure side, pay and benefit increases have all the proposed contracts and agreements included. Fuel costs and other non-pay and benefit accounts have all been increased due to inflation. So next slide, the middle column is the final budget amendment for this year. So it's almost 171,000 add to fund balance. Next year's budget, which is the right column, revenues 42.4 million. State sources make up about 73% of that total. You can see the reductions in the federal and state revenue sources between current year and next year, and they're down due to many of the grants being reduced or eliminated. Local sources are up due to increased non-homestead and commercial property tax. Total expenditures at 42.4 million. The supporting services include operating and maintenance costs of the district, transportation costs, technology, and administration costs. The primary reason for the increase on the instruction expenditure line is the pay and benefit increases are offset by the reduced curriculum purchases. So there's really not that much of a change between the years, but it's two offsetting items in there. The supporting service expenses are down due to the reduction in the capital purchases coming from the general fund. That community services and other line, that includes the preschool, wraparound, and latchkey programs. So the wraparound program will have a little higher revenue and expense next year, since that's going to be, it's actually reducing. Preschool's going up. Wraparound's going down, but we'll have an increase So 25-26 now is pretty much break even. So total revenues and total expenditures, there's a slight positive in there. This slide shows our fund balance now. At top line, we ended last year at 6.8 million in our fund balance, which was 16.3% of our total expenditures. The add of 171,000 this year brings us up just slightly over 7 million in the fund balance. Stays at 16.3% of this year's total expenditures. Next year's projection, adding 2,000, so it's pretty flat. But since total expenditures next year go down a little bit, that fund balance percentage goes up to 16.5. It took out the following 2 years, using projections, the same per pupil foundation allowance that we have in there this year, the increase in our pay and benefits for the next 2 years, and you see how that fund balance is going to decrease about 700,000 in 26-27, and then almost $1.5 million going forward into the next year. So you can see that drop now in the fund balance. And this is similar to what I showed last year. It's pretty much the same reduction going out. So there's not much change there. But those federal ESSER dollars, they drop off, and then, they're gone this year. But then some other state and federal grants are going to be either gone or reduced. So that's what's in these projections. So, I guess, who knows? We don't know. The federal government's kind of in a little bit of disarray on their budget proposals, and the state is pretty far behind. So, this is the projection as I see it right now. This one I went back to the 2019-2020 school year. You can see how it changed. Kind of like a big bell curve. This was on a chart like that. The far left column shows how much we added to our fund balance each year, starting in 2019-2020. The next column is what we added to our capital projects fund, and then the total of those two columns, and then how much we spent. That's on the far right out of our capital projects fund each year. So you can see, 2019-2020, in total, we added 913,000. Rose to 1.6 million, and then all the way up in the 2 years prior to this current year, we were up about 3.6 million that we added to fund balance for our capital projects fund. This year, we're adding 170 to fund balance, nothing in capital projects, so a total of 170,000. So in total, we're 3.4 million less than just last year. And then out of, included in this year, then almost $1.7 million was spent out of capital projects fund. That's mostly the property purchase.
Scott, can you tell us a little bit about the capital projects fund and where does that money come from?
It's really just excess fund balance. We're just putting it aside in a separate fund to use for capital projects.
What is the typical balance of that?
Right now it's about 4.2 million. Okay, so really we've got about 7 million in fund balance. If we end the year like this, 7 million in fund balance, 4.2 million in capital projects.
So 1 and 2.
Yes.
Those projections that you have as far as on the last slide with the fund balance kind of going down over the 2027-28 school year and beyond, does that include projected expenses with those capital projects that we were talking about potentially tackling? Or
No.
is that?
That would all come out of the capital projects fund.
Okay, so those
That's all
projections,
just general.
so it could look even more dismal than what you showed if we spent that money.
Well, No, because if that's all coming out of the 4.2 million, this is just the general fund that I showed there. Yep, so they're two separate pots. Okay. Now up here for 25-26, you see fund balance added the $2,000. Again, nothing to capital projects. I have nothing in the box on the far right, those next 3 years. But there will be some spending, the bond didn't pass, there were some items in that bond that have to be done and will be done soon. Gary's working on some of those items right now.
So kind of the thought process is your general fund balance is your rainy day fund for operations. So you keep that for anything like if fuel costs go way up, you have to, 3 buses crash, some of those things. But capital projects fund, you try to set money aside so the boiler breaks, so your infrastructure kind of things. And so that's why you try to set up 2 separate accounts. Now we've got this capital projects fund account, so we can address some of those infrastructure needs, but still have some rainy day fund for operational things in case something goes wrong. If the state says, hey, we're not gonna give you $400 per pupil again next year, you're gonna stay flat again, then that general fund money, that rainy day fund, that's where you get that money from. So they're all kind of like Josh just did the math in his head, it's all kind of one pot of reserve money, but we keep it separate just so that it kind of helps us keep that in mind. But yes, it's all reserve dollars that we have.
And so for the general fund budget projections, the only 2 items that would alter those numbers are an actual increase, so you're keeping a flat number. So if we went from, say, 10,000 to 10,500 a student in those following years, that would make a huge difference. If we had 50 students enroll in the following year, that would make a huge increase as well. So these are just simple projections of based off of what's happening today.
Exactly.
Or the other way around.
Exactly.
Right.
Is there, I know we talked about, fund balance percentage for the general fund. Is there a recommended, like, where you wanna be with capital projects fund?
I've never seen a recommendation.
For capital projects?
The general fund, it's 15% is
It's general,
number.
General fund, but for capital.
Oh, no.
Right.
In 1920, we were at 14,000, that's pretty low. Is that where we're, you said, we're trying to save for like a boiler.
Yeah,
So
like
we're looking at
property purchase or something.
Yeah, but, we're looking at these projects that need to be done, like, where are we comfortable getting down to, before we say, okay, we need to,
Right.
this is where we're gonna stop. And we're at 4.2 now, is it 1, we want $1 million in there for.
It'll be a total board decision, honestly, but you wouldn't wanna spend it all, because I talk about rainy day fund, but like in a hurricane, you may have to take some money out of the capital projects fund to put into operation, because we have to operate. So I wouldn't wanna spend that down to 0, because you wanna be protected for capital projects issues, but also in a super rainy day situation, you wanna have all monies available. But the board will have that decision, so we gave you that list of the biggest needs, and once we know the prices on those, and the ones that we think are the most immediate need, we'll bring those to you, and then you're gonna need to decide as a board, how much are you comfortable spending that down? And it doesn't have to be all in 1 year, right? We have a little over $4 million right now. If we spend $1.5 million on boilers and hot water heaters and a few of the really, really essentials, then maybe next year we say, well, now we can spend $1 million fixing parking lots, or, whenever it is, some of those other high ticket items are, this board will have to decide what you're comfortable for that threshold. The state tells you what they want the general fund at, but not the capital projects.
And then, I know you mentioned it too, like the cafeteria issue, have we looked into seeing if we can use that COVID money for the cafeteria stuff?
We got no COVID money.
I'm not COVID money, the food service, sorry, the free lunch service.
Oh, the
That's
food
what I
service
mean.
money,
I'm just-
it wouldn't cover the work that needs to be done.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, for that one, some of that money can't be used to.
You could use it somewhat to expand the serving lines, but it would be a drop in the bucket. So it'd be like, what she had, because it is a nice food service fund balance, but it's about a third of what the actual construction cost would be. So we'd have to take the other 2/3 out of capital projects. And I think we're in a position to do that, because then we just vulnerable if something does break. But that is, yeah, it's a good question, but I don't think there's quite enough in there for that.
Well, in the 10.5 years I've been around, we have tried incredibly hard to increase that fund balance, every year. And so it concerns me that we're looking forward in the years coming to start decreasing that, because it's really hard to get it back. Really hard to get it back.
What drove the capital projects fund down in 2022 and 2023, 24? And this is 21.
That's a lot of the COVID ESSER funds we received from the federal government.
Okay, I
You know,
mean,
there was.
that was earmarked for capital projects?
No,
We earmarked.
no.
Well, we had the ability to do that.
It was earmarked towards people costs, you know. Luckily, you know, some of it, you had to spend it on certain things, you know, so we actually had to buy certain things. Some of it, we could just take our current existing employees, social workers, and some of the counselors, and code them into these grants. So that's just really extra money, but extra money added to our fund balance, and we had adds to the capital projects.
Okay.
You know, and that's, you know, those are, I guess, best years of our lives, you're gonna see right there, unless something unusual happens in the future.
In like 19, 20, and 2021, the capital fund, I guess 2020, 2021 was probably also related to COVID. Is that 19 capital projects fund? And I'm just trying to figure out how would we increase that, to Pam's point, if we were, and I think we could use historic data and maybe do some benchmarking, some of the other districts, and see what an appropriate fund balance would be, maybe data. But I'm trying to understand, could we project any fund, any add to that fund over the course of the next 5 years?
Well, you could, but you'd have to project an increase to the per pupil foundation allowance. And the reason we had some of those early gains is because we were increasing enrollment district. I mean, we've never really gone up a whole lot, but we always went up a little bit. If you look at districts around us, they had been shrinking for years. And we had been sustaining our enrollment because of new houses coming in. But it's just, you see all these houses being filled, but that doesn't equate to our enrollment going up, because there's a lot of homeschool, a lot of parochial school, a lot of people with no kids, older kids, and so it's really hard to predict what those, because like Josh was saying, it's the per pupil allowance and the enrollment tells you how much money you're going to have. And we have no idea what the state's going to do for us, and we have no idea how many kids are going to continue to show up. So that's hard to say. One of the things that we did, so when they sent out ESSER dollars, the federal dollars, they didn't say, hey, here's a bunch of money, put it in the bank account, hang on to it in case you're going to breaks. But what they did say is, here's some money to pay for these certain personnel. Now, some districts honestly went out and said, okay, well, let's hire a bunch of people. And they went out and hired a bunch of people, and all the ESSER dollars are gone, but the people are still there. So they're really hurting, because they can't pay for these people now that they don't have their grant dollars. We didn't do that. What we did is we said, okay, we hired a few new people, but we used the ESSER dollars in a way that we could pay for some of the positions we already had, along with creating a few new positions. So now that the ESSER dollars are gone, we can absorb the cost of those additional positions, because we didn't hire a bunch of extra people. And then, because we used the ESSER dollars to pay for the employees, we used the general fund dollars that we would have paid the employees with and put that in capital projects. Does that make sense? It's kind of like, so we didn't directly take ESSER dollars and put them in the bank for capital projects. We used ESSER dollars to pay for this, and took general fund dollars to put into capital projects. But we were always very cognizant of that, and there were some districts who were very careful about not going out and hiring a bunch of new people. Because quite honestly, I didn't see the, benefit of just having more people staying around, so we didn't do that. Some of the ones that went out and hired a bunch of new people are either laying off big time, or they're absorbing a lot of financial stress.
Yeah, so it's likely our capital fund balance is better funded than some of the others in the district.
I would say that, yes. I think we did a pretty good job.
And I think also the ESSER dollars, there was some of that, not only was hiring people, but it also was doing like air quality improvements to some of that too, I think. So I think that was also why we ended up with more capital funds, so we didn't have to spend it on fixing wheels, on air handling units and stuff. So I think that's also where we ended up. With this projection, I know we had used bonds from the 2017-2025 for technology for new computers. Now, we don't have a bond to do that. So is that included in some of these projections of what some of our expenses? I know it wasn't in your list.
I don't think so.
We're buying computers every 2 years.
Yeah, well,
Next round of Chromebooks, yeah, that's not in here.
Yeah.
I guess that can be paid for in capital projects fund.
750,000? No, I think it's more. Is it like 250 or 300,000?
Yeah, 300.
Yeah.
I just, I mean, it's just something that it always, I had a question when we.
Yeah.
Like, where do these dollars come from?
Yeah.
Now, they're gonna probably, bond.
Yeah.
That's come out of general fund.
Yeah, probably not next year, but the year after, or the year after that, for sure, we'll probably start. You get to a point, instead of just doing the whole round, like, we're gonna replace all the open and all the high school, you're like, we're just gonna replace the broken ones. We're just gonna, so we're kind of in that mode now, unfortunately, we can't do sweeping changes, but, yeah, probably 2 or 3 years out.
Historically, have we spent, like we're projecting, negative contributions, so spent out of that capital fund of 693? Is that historically about what we spend in capital projects per year?
That's just a negative projection in the fund balance. So that's just our general fund expenditures, 693,000 greater than revenue.
Right,
That's what that is.
This is capital fund specific though?
No, this is general fund balance,
Oh,
not
I
the
see.
capital projects fund,
Yeah.
which I have no projections in those last 3 years.
Yeah.
It's really unknown. Maybe $1 million next year would be a good guess.
Okay, good. I've got a couple questions as we go through the slides. Do you want me to stop you as we go through them, ask questions, or come back to them at the end? What do you prefer?
I think it's easier when the slides are up.
Yeah.
We can see exactly.
Yep.
Did we pass any?
Just on page 5, the homestead village. So we have the non-homestead and commercial. The homestead village, is that 6 mils? I think that's the state requirement.
That's the 18 mils.
That is non-homestead, so this would be.
The 18 is a non-homestead, then there's 6 mils on commercial personal property. This is the, tax revenue that goes directly into our general fund.
Right, so for my home, it's homestead, it's my primary residence. Okay, there's not any villages, that one doesn't count directly to us.
Yeah, 6
So it's for the
mils,
United States.
6 mils goes into the state aid fund.
State.
Okay.
So that 6 mils goes into the state aid fund, and then they disperse it to the per pupil. So
Okay.
that's different hours.
And that is 6 mils.
That is 6 mils.
That was my question.
Yeah, So you pay 6 mils on that and then 12 mils for the debt. That, and the nice thing about the 12 mils is it stays right here in that, you know. I'm not sure we get our full 6 mils back from the state.
Yeah, I've got some questions on that. So then if you own, which I think if you own a rental property, it would be a non-homestead, or if you own a commercial rental building, that would be a commercial rental property.
All right, so back to the debt fund.
Yep. So, yeah, I'll move on to the debt fund. So, you know, Aladosa has been involved in the school loan revolving fund since 2007. You know, when the 2007 bonds were passed. Since 2007, all the way up until 2 years ago, we've had to borrow to make our principal and interest payments on the debt. Okay, so the last 10 years, we've averaged 7.5% increase in the property tax values in Allendale Township. So tax revenue is now exceeding the principal and interest payments, so we're able to pay back the school and revolving fund, which is good news. Just last month, paid back another 1.85 million to the state to bring that balance down. Right now, today, that balance is in the school and revolving fund is $18.7 million. So, you know, we have our debt and the principal and interest that we pay on our debt, but then we also have this, separate school loan revolving fund that we owe $18.7 million on. Right, we paid back $1.85 million this year. We paid back a little over 900,000 last year. So last year was the first payback year. So, you know, which is really good news. We're well ahead of schedule compared to where we were 10 years ago. We've also refunded a lot of the debt when the interest rates were low, so we brought down our interest savings, interest payments, $34.5 million when we were able to do those repayments. Next slide. So in 2017, you know, when we did the last bond issue, that was not part of the school loan revolving funds, those are considered non-qualified bonds. So in the 2017 and 2020 bonds, we need 1.64 mils to make the future principal and interest payments. The prior debt, we need 10.36 mils at this time. So that's why we're at the 12 mils on our debt levy. So that's what we promised to voters during the 2017 bond campaign. So we're still recommending to the board that we keep the 12 mils necessary for the debt service and 18 mil non-homestead renewal for the businesses, rental property, vacation homes, and commercial agriculture. That would be our 2025 tax levy.
So the 10.36 mils that's required for the debt levy from prior to the 2017 bond repayment, that includes what we're paying to the revolving fund of the state, right?
That is the
No.
school loan revolving fund.
Okay, so did we borrow from the state to make the interest and principal payments on that bond? And now we're catching up?
Chunk of debt, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
and so the 10.36 mils, that falls off. Is that what we're looking at when we were talking about the bond proposal?
Yeah, that one
Okay.
uses,
So that's when that will fall off, that is paid, and then, the 1.64 is what we're.
yeah, and that one goes down, but it's, because it's such a small, it kind of
Right.
falls down a little bit.
Okay.
And the nice thing is, so we know that there's all this growth, and we know that the home values have exceeded the 3% that they projected, and so that we're getting more each year than they projected we would get. But I always think about it like a 30-year fixed mortgage. If you just pay your monthly mortgage payment every month, you're gonna have to pay it for 30 years. So we all know that if you make an additional principal payment, you're gonna reduce the amount of time it takes you to own your home. And that's kind of what's happening with ours, because that increase is kind of like an additional principal payment on the loan, and so that's how we're shortening the life of that payment schedule.
Well, with that debt prior to 2017, we weren't even applying payment toward the principal, right? We were applying payment debt service to the revolving fund. Right, isn't that what you said?
Well,
Or just interest rate?
Both, really. I mean, you have the principal and interest payments, so you're paying down, but you're borrowing a chunk to help pay it down.
Okay.
So really during that time, the school and revolving fund is increasing while the debt balances are decreasing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering if we were to look at the original maturity date of the bonds and look at property values and see what millage will we need to levy in order to meet the debt obligation without maybe the additional principal payments. And maybe that's something we can look at in the future. I would like to just know what that millage rate would be.
Well, we calculated that for you, I shared it with you, so the lowest we can go is 10.06, there's a floor based on the law, so we can reduce by 0.3 of a mil. The problem with doing that though is that we're gonna incur greater interest costs, so we'll lose about 200,000 if we reduce by 0.3 of a mil. The other thing is, when we get these payments in, we put those into an account and they earn interest. So not only would we pay greater interest, but we actually benefit from the interest of having that money. We get it in like May or June, and we pay it in November. So there's a lot of costs associated with that. If we could drop it a mil or 1.5 mils, we should definitely look at that. I'm not sure if 0.3 mils.
Well, from 12 to 10.3 is
No.
No, you still gotta pay 1.64.
Yeah.
So again,
You still have to pay the 1.64 for the 2017 bonds. So the only thing we can do is go down to 11.7 combined. That's the best we can do.
okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's a good question that you asked, because I didn't know some of that until I started making the phone calls on it, so.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the big one.
Yeah.
Okay, food service, middle column is our amended budget now for this year. So we're gonna have about $159,000 added to fund balance in the food service fund. So in the year, 913,000. Next year, I did include $300,000 of capital items in next year's budget. We're still gonna figure out a way to spend that, but we need to get that fund balance down, and it shows that coming down from 913,000 to 675,000. At the end of this year, we're about 412,000 excess balance in our food service fund from what the state says they allow.
Is there maybe an opportunity for us to locally source some of that food?
I
Or improve what we offer in terms of nutrition?
think improvements possibly. Possibility, yes.
Okay, maybe that's something the board could look at.
Mm-hmm. I think, it's always been George Brower's, it's in her mind to do this. We spend a lot more money on food, not just cost of food's going up overall, but she has, I think, been trying to improve what's being served. A little more participation. Next slide, this is our student activity fund. This makes the athletic accounts, class accounts, and miscellaneous club accounts. So pretty much this is just money raised from donations or fundraising. So expenditures are typically pretty close to what revenue is every year. So there's always a plus or minus a small to fund balance every year. And we're showing at the end of this year, 375,000, next year, 395,000 fund balance. So that's it. So the next steps now, the regular board meeting, we'll have the 24-25 second amendment budget resolution, next year's budget resolution, and then the tax levy resolution. Will be action items.
Couple of questions. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the numbers look great. There were some questions that I had. You know, like with the student activity fund, if we have a balance of 395,000, is there maybe a way we could look to deploy that?
It's not our.
So it's not yet.
And we have to, by the beginning rules, we have to track that, but that belongs to our district funds, that's not district money.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I have the robotics is in there, you know, all the money that you raise or get donated.
Yeah.
That's part of it all, like classic counts from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. They all have classic counts, that has balances in there.
Okay.
Libraries are in there. So there's 75 separate accounts.
Okay.
that make up that balance.
Yeah, okay. That's good insight. I appreciate that. There are a couple other things I had. One of them with the budgeting for the athletics, I saw there was a pretty significant reduction in budget for wrestling and track. And it looks like they added a new boys volleyball line item. I guess specifically the wrestling, looks like we budgeted this past year $60,245, and it's going down to $2,264.
Because of the math.
The mats, yeah, we purchased.
Yeah, and this year we
Okay.
purchased a bunch of mats, we don't need to do that next year.
Okay, so that was
I
capitalized.
think that was hurdles for track, but.
Okay. All right, good.
Yeah, and then boys volleyball went from being a club sport to an MHSAA sponsored sport.
Okay.
So it's now part of what we call Schedule B, so we'll be hiring them, yeah, to use the booster.
Okay. All right, good. All right, thank you.
Okay.